On July the 10th, 2017, I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. 2 weeks prior, I had gone in for a routine physical, and my primary care doctor noticed that I had elevated protein levels. I asked what that meant, and I had lost some weight, so he gave me kind of a ridiculous answer and told me that I was eating too much chicken and having too many smoothies. When I left the office, always being curious and questioning, I Googled high protein levels in the blood, and it came up with multiple myeloma as a possible reason. I called my mother, who's a critical care nurse, and she advised me to call an oncologist. Within a week, I was in an oncologist, and he did a blood work panel on me, and it came back suspicious. And we knew that I would have one of several different blood diseases. And basically 80% of my blood had cancerous plasma cells. And he said to me, "You have 2 years to live without treatment." As I head to Tampa this Friday, December the 8th, I get injections in my stomach. And the purpose of the injections is to get the stem cells out of my bone marrow and into my bloodstream. And then on Tuesday, I sit for a 6-hour procedure where they basically take all of the blood out of my body. And as they're pulling out the blood, all of the stem cells are collected. And once I go through my chemotherapy on December the 17th, those stem cells will be infused back into my body on December the 19th. And then I'm in Tampa for 2 more weeks for recovery. And then there's months and months of recovery before I'll gain full strength. I grew up in a small town, kind of an inner city though, Bayonne, New Jersey. So I was what I would call your typical Catholic boy growing up, that I went to church on Sundays and I would go to CCD. The reality is that I did not have a relationship with Christ. I didn't even know who Christ was. I was promised that I would go to heaven because I was doing good things. If I helped somebody, that was a good thing, so I thought that was my entry into heaven. It wasn't until my daughter was 8 years old that a little girl on her swim team, they were friends and comes from a Christian family with a strong background in their faith. And she told my daughter that they could no longer be friends because my daughter wasn't going to heaven. And so obviously I was very upset that anybody would tell my daughter who and who isn't going to heaven. At that point in my life, I thought my daughter was going to heaven. So I immediately got defensive and I called the mother and I said, how dare you tell me who's going to heaven and my daughter's not. And she's 8 years old, she's crying, she feels like she just lost a very good friend. And it was very hard for me. But I give that mom a lot of credit. She never wavered in her faith. And she apologized for the delivery. She apologized how it was done, but she didn't apologize for the message. She didn't apologize to me for the fact that if my daughter hadn't accepted Jesus Christ and believed that he died for her sins, that she indeed wasn't going to heaven. It was probably the first big thing that I heard or I needed to hear in my walk with Christ. That night, I got in touch with another friend of mine who's a Christian, and I texted her and told her the story. And immediately she didn't reply back, but by the morning there was a text on my phone, and the text echoed, in fact, that I wasn't going to heaven because I had not accepted Jesus Christ. So at that point, I felt like there was a convincing argument that I wasn't going to heaven, and I had massive anxiety at the time. So part of my anxiety was my health and just some level of uncertainty about my eternity. Where would I go? Was I going to heaven? So at that point, I started going to church with my friend who said to me that, no, you're not. A few weeks later, I bought my first Bible that I owned, other than the one I was given as a child. And I started asking some people where to start, and they said start in the beginning, start in Genesis. Some people suggested start in the Gospels, and I bounced around for probably a month. And it wasn't until I got to the book of John and I started reading through it, and I got to John 3:16, where everything had changed for me. Now, I've been in 100 stadiums in my life, and I've seen this number written on, Tim Tebow. But to be honest with you, I didn't know what I was looking at until after I read it. I remember reading John 3:16 and how profound it was on me. Because as I was reading it, I couldn't help but think about my own son. So I'm reading about what God did, and how he sacrificed his son for the good of the world. And I put that in my own life. And I thought about my son. And I thought about, what if I had the ability to save the world, but I have to sacrifice Josh? Could I do that? And that moment was when I realized that, in fact, I wasn't saved, because that's not what I believed, but it's what I wanted to believe. And it just hit me so hard when I read the words, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." Because that was the promise I was looking for. The promise that I would be going somewhere after my life here. And then, John 3:17, "For God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world would be saved through him." In John 3:18, "Those who believe are not condemned, but those who do not believe are already condemned, for they do not believe in the name of the only Son of God." It was the combination of 16, 17, and 18 that truly changed my life. And nobody had told me, go read John 3:16. God in his perfect timing had me read it exactly when I needed to read it, when it would reach my heart and have the strongest impact. And I remember running downstairs, and I gathered my son, my daughter, and my wife, and my mother was there. And I read out of the Bible, and I read the words, and my wife goes, "That's John 3:16. Everybody knows that verse." And I said, "But I didn't know that verse." I said, "I've never heard of John 3:16. And then I had a flash, I'm like, oh yeah, the 3:16, that's what it is. I didn't know what that even meant, and I never asked anybody what it meant. When I woke up the next morning, I was saved. I felt like a different person. I felt like I left my body. I felt like that was the beginning of a new life for me. And at that point, my only goal was to make sure that my son and my daughter had a relationship with Christ. So we began to get more involved in the church. My wife was serving. My kids were part of their youth ministry. And it was many months later that both my son and daughter had accepted Christ. And that was, obviously the greatest day of my life. Everything is perfect in His timing. I believe that I wasn't ready to accept Christ until I was in my 40s. I believe that He waited for me and the timing to bring people into my life for when I was going to be ready to start this relationship with Him. And I also believe that He held off on the cancer until I was saved. He put the things in the order they needed to be. in order for me to best handle them. From that day forward, the one thing I never worried about was my place and where I'll be should something go wrong. I never was worried about dying, which is exactly what I would have been worried about prior to being saved. The only thing I was concerned about was getting better to live now, to be able to share my story with others and hopefully bring more people to Christ. My promise is that I will get to spend the rest of my life in heaven, and my wife and children are saved, so I know I leave them in the best hands. And there's risk involved, and I had to sign consents that it's possible I could die. I don't believe I'm going to die. I believe that the Lord has a lot more in store for me here, but there's no level of anxiety right now with where I go should something bad happen. And that's really just truly an unbelievable gift. I knew that the impact that I could make on my swimmers, my family, friends, was greater than any other way I could reach them. And I knew that I had to be strong for them. I had to show them the Lord working in me. I know that I have so many people back home that I'm gonna get through this, and I'm gonna get through this because of their prayers and their strength. And I'll be back to Kings when this is all done, back with my team, and that's just where I want to be back. This is without a doubt the most difficult thing that I've had to deal with. But the only reason that I'm able to get through it is because I know that Jesus Christ died on the cross for me. Without the hope of heaven and the promise of heaven, because I've accepted him as my Lord and Savior, this would be insurmountable. So for those of you who know the Lord, my advice to you when you're going through a difficult situation is to lean on him. Lean on him and allow him to be there every step of the way with you. I haven't really done that throughout this entire process the way I would have liked to. So if I could go back to day one, I would lean on him even more than I already did. For those of you who don't know the Lord, my advice is to learn about him, to take the same steps that I took, to go get a Bible and to read about the Lord, to ask a friend who is a Christian about the Lord, to go to somebody in the school who you trust, a teacher or a faculty member, and ask questions about the Lord. Because when you are in this situation, the only person that can really pull you through is him. And if you develop that relationship with him, then you'll be able to overcome anything that comes in your life. My name's Jonathan Zuchowski. I'm the Aquatics Director and the Boys and Girls Varsity Coach.